Hello, sophomores. Let's go ahead and get started. This is your first recorded lecture of the year. We're going to begin at a sort of high meta level, talking about history, what it is as a subject, and also why we should be studying it. And so that's the title of your notes for today. We'll also use this lecture to practice taking Cornell notes, something that should be familiar to most of you, I think, from last year. So, take out a blank sheet of paper. You should put the title at the top, Why Study History. And then over here on the side, you should have the date. And then if this was your sheet of paper right here, you've got your title. It's over here. And then draw a line about 2 inches down on the page, right? Or 2 inches along the side of the page. Notice I've put a line here, and I'm going to draw headers. Okay. So let's begin. So why should we study history? What do we get out of it? What's the point, other than it being a required course that you all have to take? All right. So that first header says doomed to repeat. Okay. Doomed to repeat. Now, and some of this will be a little bit familiar from last year, but if there's ever a knock against history classes, right? When you have a bad history class, the flaw, the complaint is usually that it's boring, right? That it's a lot of endless information that doesn't make sense and you don't see the point of it, right? One of my favorite examples of this is the history teacher in Harry Potter, who was actually a ghost. He was someone so boring that he kept lecturing until he died at his podium, and then he got right back up dead and just kept going. You kind of get the sense that J.K. Rowling maybe resented some of her history teachers for being boring in school, right? Unlike almost all the other teachers at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books, the history teacher was pointless and he never helped anybody. So that's the problem. When history goes wrong, it's sometimes, or when it's not done well, it's sometimes boring or pointless, maybe even irrelevant. Okay. Does it have any use? What can it be good for? All right. If we were all together and I asked you and I said, why should we study history? I'll bet some of you would have said, and some of you are probably even like mouthing this to yourself right now, you would have said something like, well, history teaches us to avoid mistakes. Or maybe you brought out the quote, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So history is good for avoiding mistakes. And if we don't study it, if we don't study history, we are doomed to repeat it. And that's a famous quote from George Santayana, who was a philosopher. Although you also hear it attributed to other people. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Now, this is true. I do agree with this, and I think that this is a good reason to study history. But I actually think that this is only scraping the surface, and I think we can go much deeper, and frankly, we can be much more interesting, because I've heard this quote a lot as a history teacher. What this really means is that history can help us make better predictions and decisions about the future, right? By relying on knowledge from the past. So history teaches us lessons. It's like a computer predictive model which improves our ability to make forecasts or something. Let me show you some examples, some practical ways. Some practical ways in which this works. There's obviously the high-level stuff, sort of at the political level, right? This is the grand important stuff, and history teachers are always trying to justify, like, look, history teaches us these important things, right? Okay, fine. Well, let me give you an example with another movie quote. In the movie Princess Bride, there's a character who he's in a confrontation with another character, and he thinks he's about to win, and he says, "Ha! You fell for one of the classic blunders. Never get involved in a land war in Asia," right? In other words, learn from the past, learn from previous mistakes, and don't do that in the future. Land wars in Asia failed. Don't do it, right? Another one I remember that was talked about a lot when I was growing up and people were debating the Iraq War, whether or not the U.S. should invade Iraq in 2003. People said, oh no, you can't give in to the dictator Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq. History shows us that we don't want to appease tyrants. Because we had appeased Hitler in 1938 and given him what he wanted. And if we'd fought Hitler earlier, maybe it would have gone better. This is often kind of boiled down to the whole history teaches us that, and then people say some lesson, some perceived lesson. History shows us that when you do this, this happens. History shows us that that empires rise and fall. History shows that nations fall like the Roman Empire. History tells us that America will fall like the Roman Empire. That's one I hear a lot. I don't think I actually believe it. But, you kind of get the point of this. But it can also play out at the individual level. And in fact, I'd like to suggest that this is something we do every day. You do this all the time. You are, in fact, all historical creatures who act based on historical reasoning. I'll bet for sure some of you have done exactly this sort of thing in the last day or two. Did you ever ask a friend, so how was that movie? What movie should I watch? Have you seen this? Or have you ever been to a restaurant for the first time and somebody else has been there? And you say, so what's good on the menu, right? Let's say, maybe some of you have already done this. Some of you had Mr. Karros for history last year. Many of you had me. Maybe some of you who had Mr. Karros asked somebody else, like, so what's Mr. Rogers like? I haven't had him yet as a teacher, right? You do this sort of thing all the time. Find somebody who has knowledge of something, right? Somebody else has gone through that event, so then ask them, hey, what's this like? That's one of the most best and important ways we can learn, right? Did you teach yourself a new hobby or a craft during, quarantine? And did you look up information about it? Were you playing a video game and you got stuck on a level or figuring out how to use something, and so you watched a YouTube video of someone else who's already done that thing? You're relying on historical knowledge of a past event to improve your decision making and your knowledge of the future. Right? Movies. How to do, e.g., like what movie to watch, how to do something, right? You go and look up something on YouTube or Wikipedia to give you some basic information. You're relying on historical knowledge, and we all do this all the time. That's very useful and very practical. And so in this way, we are all historical people. Yay. And again, that's very helpful. All other things being equal, the more knowledge you have, the better a decision maker you'll be, right? If you had, the sum total knowledge of how the economy works, you could make good bets on the stock market, couldn't you? Or how an election might turn out. Or what jobs would be the best to take. Sure, the more knowledge you know about something, the better your prediction. Okay, that's great. But I want to point out something. This idea of learning lessons is something history shares with other disciplines. For example, literature. You learn about the human condition by reading great books. So you read the Iliad and you imagine yourself in the place of Odysseus, and that gives you a better insight into the human condition, into the human soul. Philosophy helps you work through thought experiments about how humans tend to act in a situation so that you can hopefully exercise better judgment in the future. The study of politics helps you better understand the political world so you can be a better voter and leader, right? And often this involves teaching lessons. So in this sense, history isn't that different from other disciplines. Now, its focus, its content is different. It's strictly the past. Literature can be a fictional story. History is supposed to be a factual thing that happened. But the basic idea is the same. Learning lessons based on the knowledge you get from something. So in that sense, history is not unique. This is not what is unique about history. To find out what is unique about history, well, come back and watch the second part of this video. I'll clear this there so you can see the notes.